Fair warning, I got sick for the second month in a row, so it might be a little hard to understand me this video. In parts 1 and 2 of Guess Right, we talked about guess right mentions in all the books. Throughout the 5 books, we learned guess right is extremely important in Westeros, whether you are below or above the wall, though the North is a bit more extreme about it. Guess right protects the host from harming the guest, and the guest from harming the host. However, guest harming guests doesn't seem to be in the rulebook so far. Giving food and drink signifies guess right is being given, bread and salt and wine. Bearing your unsheathed sword across your lap before they can take refreshments signifies guess right will not be given. You can end guess right by giving the other party a gift. We'll eventually talk about guess right in our own world, guess right and Roose Bolton, guess right and Wyman Manderley, and guess right in the Purple Wedding, but today, let's talk about the consequences of breaking guess right in the books, for the breaker of it, and for society. Let's start with House Frey. What are the consequences of the Freys breaking guess right at the Red Wedding? The first consequence we plainly see is the massive amount of dishonor it brings to House Frey. People are disgusted and strongly dislike the Freys for violating one of the oldest and most sacred traditions of old, especially in the North. Their own allies, and I say that word in quotations, share this disgust for them. There are so many jabs and negative associations about the Freys post the Red Wedding from allies and enemies alike. Being called a Frey is now seen as an insult, not that they were ever well liked before. 2 of my favorite Frey insults in the books are when Davos asks what a Frey would know of honor, in the company of Freys, and at the meeting in the Vale with the Lords Declarant, when Lyn Corbray takes out his longsword and threatens Littlefinger while protected by guess right, Littlefinger being the host and the Lords being the guests. Another guest yells, "Put up your steel, sir. Are you Corbray or a Frey? We are guests here." Being called a Frey is now an insult used by others in the 7 Kingdoms. Besides those 2 insults, we also see the Frey's own allies don't think much of them after the Red Wedding. At Winterfell, when Lord Manderley is being accused of killing a young Frey boy, he asks the boy's age. A Frey responds, 9 on his last name day. Lord Manderley replies, "So young, though mayhaps this was a blessing. Had he lived, he would have grown up to be a Frey." Of course, using the word ally in relation to Lord Manderley and the Freys is a bit of a stretch. When the siege of Riverrun is happening, the Frey's own allies think it would be great if the Blackfish were to make a sortie, and it would be nice if he culled some Freys too. The Frey's own allies want their house numbers to be thinned down, and actually think it would be a great thing if some of them were killed. The beatdown of the Freys continues by their own allies when during a war council called by Jaime to discuss the siege, Lord Piper says, "The man's not bloody stupid, Norbert. He has eyes, and too much sense to yield to such as these." He makes a rude gesture in the direction of a Frey. The Frey bristles, saying if his lord means to imply, which Lord Piper responds, "I don't imply, Frey. I say what I mean straight out, like an honest man. But what would you know of the ways of honest men? You are a treacherous lying weasel, like all of your kin. I'd sooner drink a pint of piss than take the word of any Frey." Though in the Frey's defense, Lord Piper is upset about kin still being held hostage post the Red Wedding. Also, Ramsay Bolton, though he is a cold bastard, says what a lot of people in the 7 Kingdoms are thinking. The world won't miss a few Freys. Through these quotes, we see it doesn't matter if you are a Frey and weren't involved in the Red Wedding, such as a small Frey child. If you are a Frey, you are guilty by association. You now hold the stigma that is on your house. The backlash or fear of backlash for breaking guess right is so bad, the Freys even make up a lie to try to cover for what they did. They claim the Red Wedding was Robb Stark's doing and that he changed into a beast, along with some of his other Northmen, before the Freys' eyes. They explain that Robb was more beast than boy, puffed up with pride and bloodlust, and he was faithless, as Walder Frey learned to his sorrow. Though the Freys know that most of the Northmen don't believe them and their lies, and they more think that they have to go along with the lie or die. In other cases, we've seen a Frey defend their actions by saying the Starks dishonored them and they were getting vengeance, so it was alright. They're trying very hard to justify what they did to circumvent some of this blowback. So the first consequence of breaking guess right would definitely be the destroying of the house's honor that violated it, earning them a general dislike from the rest of the 7 Kingdoms. Breaking guess right definitely destroyed what honor was left to House Frey, creating an intense disgust for their house. But there are also much more dire, far-reaching consequences of their betrayal besides how it affects the Freys. It isn't far-reaching to claim that guess right was used to keep civil society from falling apart. Sound a bit dramatic? If you can't trust guess right and the protection it offers, Why would you ever trust peace negotiations? If you can't trust the person you are sharing bread, salt, and wine with not to kill you instead of reaching a mutual agreement that benefits both of you, why risk it? If guess right isn't an absolute, then everyone will fight to the bitter end until one side is crushed. Related to this is when Tywin Lannister tells Joffrey, "Joffrey, when your enemies defy you, you must serve them steel and fire. When they go to their knees, however, you must help them back to their feet. Elsewise, no man will ever bend the knee to you." If enemies know that they will most likely be killed, why would anyone ever negotiate if they don't have that guarantee of surviving? If it's highly probable you'll be cut down during these peace negotiations that take place under guess right, who would take that risk? The Freys, through breaking guess right, have created a general distrust among the people of the Seven Kingdoms. In fact, the Freys' actions at the Red Wedding left such a heavy stain on guess right that safety in a stranger's castle is no longer a guarantee. Peace negotiations aren't as trusted. A losing side isn't willing to concede for fear that peace terms won't be honored. A great example of this was when we talked in a previous guess right video about the siege of River Run, where Jenna Lannister was talking to Jaime Lannister about how he would end the siege. Jaime responds, "Treat with the Blackfish." She counters, "That won't work." "I mean to offer him good terms," Jaime adds. She replies, "Terms require trust. The Freys murdered guests beneath their own roof, and you, well, I mean no offense, my love, but you did kill a certain king you had sworn to protect." Here we see the direct result of guess right being violated. No one trusts anyone. They'd rather fight on and die than meet and risk being killed anyway. The Blackfish says it perfectly. "My men would sooner die upon their feet fighting than on their knees beneath a headman's axe." Blackfish doesn't trust Jaime Lannister's words for a minute and won't give up or negotiate. This distrust is intensified in the Freys' case because those that had kinship with the Freys were also betrayed and killed at the Red Wedding. At the Siege of Raventree, Lord Tydos Blackwood tells Jaime, "Lucas was murdered at the Red Wedding. Walder Frey's fourth wife was a Blackwood, but kinship counts for no more than guess right at the twins." There's a general fear now. Hospitality isn't upheld. Kinship means nothing. Who do you trust? The tension between the houses is building. This distrust and breaking down of safe negotiations where the sharing of food and wine means nothing could be devastating with the winter that is gripping Westeros, especially in the north. If you can't trust anyone, why would you risk traveling? You might go to someone's home or inn and have guess right and not know if you're going to be killed or your supplies taken so that the host can have more resources to survive winter. Sure, there was always a small chance of that happening, but in the world where breaking guess right is becoming more accepted, every inn, every castle, every home you visit is now a huge risk. Why would you take that risk by traveling in the winter? Because guess right ensures safety in a stranger's home and peaceful negotiations with an enemy, it is no surprise that the citizens of the Seven Kingdoms frown on it being broken and have such an intense reaction to the Freys doing so, besides the religious aspects of breaking guess right being against the will of the gods. You can't very well applaud House Frey for all they achieved through the Red Wedding and for being crafty, because the second one breaking of guess right is applauded, then you cannot trust anyone to honor guess right, and you can't trust anyone. Guess right is extremely important to a civilized society and serves a function, but only if everyone agrees to it. When lords and ladies and citizens start picking and choosing, the whole system falls apart. This breakdown of trust doesn't just affect the lords of the Seven Kingdoms, but all the way down to the small folk as well. If your liege lords don't have to abide by guess right, why do you? We see hints of the small folk not believing guess right is as important anymore since the Red Wedding. A great example is Brienne of Tarth being shocked when she is given over to the Brotherhood without banners. She gasps, "Bread and salt, the inn, Septim Maribald, fed the children, we broke bread with your sister." The woman that brings her to the companion says, "Guess right don't mean so much as it used to, not since Milady came back from the wedding." Then later, when Brienne is then presented to an undead Catelyn Stark, she says that she's dead. The woman from earlier responds, "Death and guess right, they don't mean so much as they used to, neither one." These simple statements keep driving home how devastating the Freys' act was to society and structure. Now let's talk if there is some type of divine consequence for breaking guess right. Obviously, there's some disgust for the phrase breaking guess right because it went against customs and the will of the gods. When we read about the rat cook in A Storm of Swords, we learn that the gods cannot forgive the breaking of guess right. To do so is to incur their wrath. The rat cook tells the story of a man that broke guess right and was turned into a monstrous rat forced to eat its own young. Could there be a magical nature to guess right? A magical nature that when broken, the gods punish you. Besides the rat cook story, we don't have any more real examples of the gods directly punishing someone for breaking guess right. We could say we've seen people who have broken guess right punished in the books, though. Jaime Lannister definitely broke guess right when he pushed Bran Stark out of the tower at Winterfell. A few books later in A Storm of Swords, Jaime has his hand cut off, presumably the hand that pushed Bran out of the tower. Coincidence? Or divine punishment? Tywin Lannister helped orchestrate the Red Wedding where many men died from crossbow bolts, including Robb Stark being shot by his own kin. The Freys were now part of his family as Edmure Tully married into the Freys. Tywin Lannister was then killed by his own kin with a crossbow bolt. Another coincidence? Also, Catelyn Stark was killed while under guess right, yet she was resurrected and now seeks to punish those responsible. Was that divine intervention? Did Beric Dondarrion revive her because of some divine inspiration? Does he want to fulfill the prophecy of the ghost of Highheart, who had predicted Catelyn Stark coming back? Was he fulfilling prophecy sent from the gods to get revenge on those that broke sacred guess right? Or was he just a guy that was tired of being brought back over and over, where each time he lost more and more of himself? Catelyn Stark could be seen as the god's form of vengeance. She hates all Freys, even the ones that were against the Red Wedding. On the Freys' end, they are definitely getting blowback from what they did, and we see other people besides Lady Stoneheart seeking revenge on the Freys. It's interesting that more Freys have been killed due to their treachery at the Red Wedding than died during the War of the Five Kings. Because of what the Freys did, all the Freys seem to be made to suffer, not just the guilty ones. That seems like an overkill divine punishment of old we hear about in our own stories. Oh, you screwed up? The gods are now going to screw with your entire genetic line. Even when those responsible for the deed are dead, we're still going to punish your family and have terrible things happen to you. Could all these cases truly be the gods demanding justice for the crime of both breaking the guess right and helping others plan to break it? If the gods are offering some type of divine punishment, we aren't likely to know they are. George R. R. Martin has been very clear that the gods aren't likely to show up or appear in Westeros any more than we've already seen them do. They won't be affecting the outcome of things. He has said that he wants to leave the relation between the gods, justice, and various magics as something for the reader to puzzle out. That most likely means that people are being punished by the gods for breaking guess right. We probably won't ever have those gods appearing, letting us know. We might have a follower of a particular god saying that is what is happening, but in their society, they would say that regardless if the god was actually intervening or not. Alright, so we know that breaking a guess right will destroy your house's reputation. It affects the rest of the Seven Kingdoms in regard to trade negotiations and general trust, including making the small folk less likely to honor guess right or see a problem in breaking it. And there may or may not be divine consequences to breaking it. But what are the consequences in regards to the future of our characters? This is purely speculation as we don't have the next book yet, but most likely House Frey will face their house becoming extinct. There is far too much animosity towards them and people attempting to get vengeance. They have Lady Stoneheart after them, some northern houses' wrath, as well as the mountain clans, and even their allies have talked of turning on the Freys. And we can't forget Arya Stark, who has stated one day she will figure out the name of the Freys that betrayed her family and kill them. She has a very long memory. If when Walder Frey dies, it is highly likely a succession war will happen if they haven't already lost their position. Since the Freys can't be trusted to negotiate or uphold agreements, they might have quite a bit of trouble holding on to their lands. The Boltons will most likely also pay for helping the Freys break guess right, even though Roose Bolton technically didn't break guess right himself. He has brought the hatred of some of the northern houses down on him for helping Walder Frey, and a civil war in the north is looming. Many people also suspect the Lannisters' hand in this treachery. The Lannisters have gone down quite a bit in popularity polls, and there's a good chance we might see Tywin Lannister's decision to go through with the Red Wedding help end or almost end his house. After hearing about the consequences or potential consequences of breaking guess right, what do you think is the answer to Tywin Lannister's question to Tyrion about the Red Wedding? Explain to me why it is more noble to kill 10,000 men in battle than a dozen at dinner. Also, do you think the events at the Red Wedding will cause more lords to violate guess right in the future, or actually make it more likely they won't since they see the devastation it brought houses involved? Thanks for being patient with me this month. December Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire videos will still be twice a week, with an extra news video when there's enough material. They just might be on weird days until the silly chaotic month is over. If you didn't see my Game of Thrones news video, check out the end to enter a new giveaway.